All right, we're going to talk about cheese and why I eat cheese pretty much every other day. I think cheese has had a bit of a branding issue over the last couple of years because of its reputation of being high in saturated fat, high in sodium. It has a notorious reputation for contributing to heart disease and blood pressure, but does it really deserve this bad rap? We're going to break down why this bad rap and where this reputation has actually come from, what the studies demonstrate about cheese consumption, and how to distinguish between the best and worst types of cheeses. I'm not going to talk about the ethical considerations of cheese making. That's an entirely different topic, and I respect the fact that it is pretty horrific. I mean, animal agriculture in general. But that aside, we're just going to talk about cheese on the surface level of whether it is healthy or not healthy. So the claims that cheese are bad for health are based on saturated fat and salt, but recent studies have actually shown that as part of our diet, so this is part holistically as part of our diets, it has a neutral effect on overall health, or even a slight benefit on health, even on cardiovascular outcomes as well. There was a recent umbrella review of observational studies, and cheese consumption was linked to lower risks of mortality. It was 5% lower risk of all-cause mortality, heart disease, 7 to 8% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality, plus breast cancer risk. A lower risk of 11%, type 2 diabetes, reduced risk of 7%, total fracture risk of less than 10%. What's going on with these? Well, the first thing to caveat everything that I've just said, these are based on observational studies. It's really hard, even when looking at these really big data sets, to actually determine whether cheese is healthful for the individual and also what is truly going on. These associations between cheese consumption can sometimes be confounded by the types of people who consume cheese in high frequencies. So it's really, really hard to determine the causality of cheese and whether cheese itself is actually having mechanistically a positive effect that is protecting us against cardiovascular disease and cancer risk and type 2 diabetes, etc. And that's without even getting into the nuances of what different types of cheeses there are out there and which ones are better for you than others. So what might be going on? Well, there's something called the cheese matrix. We now understand that the source of saturated fats actually does make a difference. So saturated fat is not necessarily saturated fat. There are all different types of saturated fats out there, and they differ based on the carbon chain length. And you have different names for these different saturated fatty acids. Sometimes it's palmitic acid, sometimes it's stearic acid. There's all these different types of saturated fats. And in cheese, fats are actually part of a special structure called the dairy matrix, and this affects how the fats are digested and used. And this also includes a protective layer of fat called the milk fat globule membrane, the MFGM, which actually might help lower cholesterol and support heart health as well. In addition to these strange matrices, cheese is actually a source of high quality protein, mainly casein, which is one of the most absorbable types of protein next to whey. It's also a source of vitamin K2, which is something that is quite hard to get from a plant-based diet in its entirety. It's one of the reasons why I personally supplement with vitamin K2 with my vitamin D3 supplement. And this has been shown to prevent vascular calcification and lowers age-related bone loss. One of the reasons why is because vitamin K2 is involved in calcium regulation around the body. So it governs in some ways how and where we source calcium. So away from our arteries and into our bone, for example. Talking of calcium, it is a source of calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. It has these other bioactive compounds like lactoferrin and short-chain fatty acids, as well as these milk fat globule membranes, these MFGMs. And there's also the potential probiotic effect in certain cheeses. So not all cheeses are a source of probiotics, but some are, and introducing probiotics into our diet is something that we are learning a lot more about as potentially having a beneficial effect on our gut microbiota, which is having an anti-inflammatory effect or even a potential beneficial effect on cardiovascular health and other inflammation related conditions. Just a quick one. If you want to learn the 5 ingredients that I think are fantastic for inflammation that you should be getting into your diet every week, then download this PDF right now. It's in the link down there, and I'll send you my 5 ingredients for inflammation. What about skin and acne? This is something that I get asked a lot about. Is cheese good or bad for acne? And there was a 2019 meta-analysis, again, of observational studies that found that high intake of dairy and total milk consumption was linked to the presence of acne. However, when it came to the association between yogurt, fermented dairy, or cheese and acne, there wasn't a significant association. I would say it also depends on the individual differences. So most of the research that we've got actually comes from Europe and North America. So we should really be careful about saying cheese or dairy products are good or bad for an Asian population, an Indian population, African or Caribbean population. They're completely different genetics and different eating styles, and what we're actually used to. And also the population of their gut microbes might be different as well, depending on what their current diet is as well. So these are things that you need to tease apart. What would I eat instead if I'm consuming cheese or not having cheese? Cheese might actually have an effect because it partially pushes out other foods. So if I'm having more cheese, which has all these different benefits and it's minimally processed as a food, and that actually leads me to consume less ultra processed food, it might be having that substitution effect. How cheese impacts your health may actually depend on what you're eating it with. So if you're pairing cheese with vegetables or fruits as part of a diverse whole food plant focused diet, that's going to have more beneficial effects than having it with refined foods or processed foods like pizza, for example, processed meat. So how you consume cheese is going to be vastly different whether you're putting it as a topping on pizza versus whether you're having it as part of a cheese board before having, your plate of greens or your lean meats, for example. And the dose in the research is around 30 to 40 grams per day seems the optimal amount for health benefits. That's roughly 3 tablespoons of cottage cheese or a small slice of hard cheese. That's actually not that much. So the quantity of cheese that is supposedly beneficial is actually quite small. A lot of people think of cheese as big sort of cheese drawers and having mountains of cheese on a shepherd's pie or any sort of pie, but actually the amounts that seem optimal for health benefits are quite low. The type of cheese as well is going to have a massive effect. So the ultra processed cheese, the stringy sort of cheese that you find in American cheeseburgers or packets that you put in Lunchables and that kind of stuff, those are going to be ultra processed cheeses that tend to have a lot more additives, definitely won't have the probiotics, and are laden sometimes with sugars and dyes and salts and other preservatives. Whereas a less processed cheese, which is just milk and a few cultures, they might have much more in the way of health benefits because of the potential probiotics and the lack of other additives to the cheese as well. So the variation of cheese and their dairy matrix and their nutrient content is going to vary from cheese to cheese as well. So there's something that can't be discounted from the research. What is going to be a quality cheese then? If you're interested in having cheese for these potential benefits, whilst again, like being aware of the caveats of not reading too much into this research, what are the types of cheese that I think are going to be more beneficial than others? So the first thing I think of is high protein cheeses. So cheese like cottage cheese, feta, halloumi, paneer, cheddar, these tend to have quite high amounts of protein, and the protein quantity in cheese can vary from 10% to 25%. So there's a real big variation in the protein quantity. And if you have more protein, then you're going to have less of the different types of saturated fats. And the process by which you actually achieve that higher protein might be testament to the process of that cheese making that leads to some of these benefits. So high protein cheese are things that I tend to look for. Simple ingredients, so just milk and some of the cultures. That's all you need for cheese and an aging process. If it's got added emulsifiers and added dyes and salts and that kind of stuff, I tend to steer clear of those ones. And you can recognize a whole cheese from a refined cheese. No stabilizers as well. That's one of the things that I also look out for. Look for whole cheeses instead of the pre-sliced or the pre-grated cheeses. Again, a little bit of a telltale sign, not always, but one of the telltale signs that this has undergone some degree of processing that requires preservatives and stabilizers to keep it in that pre-sliced form or that grated form. And a bonus, I tend to opt for artisanal cheeses that are made using traditional methods and those simple ingredients, whilst supermarket cheese tends to be mass produced using machinery that can actually further disrupt that dairy matrix as well. But we definitely need more studies to determine that, because there isn't too much in the way of evidence for that being a better or more healthful cheese than others. My favorite ways to enjoy cheese are actually part of a whole food, plant-focused diet. I don't tend to have cheese every single day, but I have it every other day. And these are cheeses that I feel add to not just the protein content of the meal. We know protein is very important, particularly as we age, and we tend to require more protein, but also as part of the flavor and texture of meals. So I will have a goat's cheese with cavolo nero, beans, pickled red onions, for example. We have loads of recipes that use cheese on the Doctor's Kitchen app as well, but good quality cheese, or ways in which to add a little bit of a saltiness without having to rely on other ways of introducing salt. So it's more used as a flavoring agent rather than something that is used in huge quantities. These are the ways in which I think cheese can be enjoyed in a real healthful way. A couple of questions that I've had is aged cheese better? So this is really interesting, because as cheese ages, especially these hard and matured varieties, the lactic acid bacteria break down a lot of the lactose, and the longer the cheese has been aged, the less lactose, which is a typical milk sugar, is remaining in that final product. A lot of people actually suffer with lactose intolerance. So a lot of people can't tolerate milk, for example. I'm actually one of them. I can't have like a big jug of milk and then just wash that down, because the lactose is something that my microbes aren't used to. And I certainly get a lot of gastro discomfort, and a lot of people have those issues as well. The longer you age that cheese, the less lactose is in that product, because the lactic acid has broken it down. So they tend to have lower lactose levels that make them a lot easier for people to digest them as well. So that might be one of the reasons in which aged cheese is better. And some of the examples that are actually aged include Parmigiano Reggiano, which is actually one of the my favorite cheeses. That's actually shown to have less than 0.01 grams per 100 grams of residual galactose content after the aging process. Does it offer any other health benefits? It's hard to know, because those studies haven't actually been done. But in terms of the lactose issues, that would be mitigated by having an aged cheese as well. There's another question around goat's cheese versus sheep cheese, which is better for health. Again, it's not as clear cut as to whether if you're using goat's cheese or a sheep's cheese, one is better or not. There are higher protein and different beta caseins in sheep and goat's cheese, so it might be better tolerated by those who are lactose intolerant again. The cons of that, they are higher in calories and fat if you're into that thing, but given the doses of cheese that you should be consuming every single day, around 30 to 40 grams, it shouldn't have that much of an impact on your overall energy intake. So sheep's cheese and goat's cheese, again, from the perspective of having lower amounts of lactose, might be more tolerable for people who can't deal with the lactose content in dairy. But in terms of these ultimate health benefits, it's really hard to tell whether goat's or sheep's cheese is going to be better for you. That's about it. Let me know if I've missed anything about cheese in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. If you want to improve your heart health and lower cholesterol, then check out this video right here, where I do a deep dive into ingredients that can lower your cholesterol and potentially unclog your arteries.